So our mission from Hockey Canada, and I think from a provincial level like the OHF and minor hockey associations, the goal should be to lead, develop, and promote positive hockey experiences. It's one of the things that we think is important. The rink has to be a great place for the kids to come to, but it also has to be a great place for coaches to come to. And at the end of the day, if you have fun as a coach, I think it's going to translate into the players having fun on the ice. And so we're going to go through a bunch of different sort of concepts and skills and look at how we sort of break down skill development. And I think it's going to be something that everyone's going to be able to pull something out of and either enhance what you're already doing or maybe provide you some new ideas as well. When we look at a development plan, I think it's important to, as a coach, to identify the specific skills needed to develop the players, decide how to best develop those skills, implement the specific skill development in the drill design and practice plans, develop and make available not only to the other coaches, but the parents and players resources that can help them achieve them goals. So whether it's sharing information or sharing video, it's a great way to give them some ideas on what you're trying to do. And then design that productive yearly development plan. It doesn't mean you have to start the season and have a plan for every practice from start to finish, but I think it is important to have a plan when you're going into practice. And I understand, you know, for a lot of us, you're busy, you're coming from work or you're coming from other activity and you got to get on the ice. And so sometimes it can be difficult to plan everything out, but I typically like to try and do my practice plans in groups of 5. And at the end of those 5 ice sessions or practices, I like to review and see where we're at. And sometimes after a practice, I try and ask myself, you know, what did they get better at today? And sometimes they're going to say nothing. But other times you're going to see that progress and development. And it's okay if they don't get better every single day, but over time with repetition, you are going to see players getting better and performing the skills to the point where they really want to be able to translate what you're doing in practice into the game environment. And I would say that's one of the biggest things that we focus on from a Hockey Canada level is how do these skills translate into what is being done in a game. And we think if it happens in a game, then we should practice it. There's obviously going to be times when, you know, you're maybe working on skills where you might have 2 pucks or different things like that obviously doesn't happen in a game, but it is a purpose to it. So we want to try and cover some of those things off today as well. From a skill improvement standpoint, I think it's important to understand where players are in their skill development and really trying to make sure that we're doing things that are age applicable. That doesn't mean that we don't challenge players every day. We want to make sure that we are challenging them. And even if it's not perfect at first, and in most cases it's not, it means that they have an opportunity to get better and to try things. It's important to know where they need to get to in their skill development. So if you're coaching U7 or U9, where should they be when they're U11? And from U13 on to U15. So we're always trying to look ahead a little bit and see where do we need to get these players so that they can perform at the next level. We need to look at what's the skill development required, what's the tactical development, how do we instruct or how do we teach these players? Are we spending every 5 seconds of a drill trying to correct players, or do we give them opportunities to figure things out and sort of develop it at a little bit of their own pace? What is the teaching process to use? Do we spend a lot of time demonstrating as a coach, or do we get right into the fact where players are being active and they get a chance to jump right in and try things? And then how do these apply to game and team play? And I think once a coach or instructor knows these areas that they need to work on, then it's important to include those into efficient drills that really focus on repetition and specificity in all practice. So we do have a plan as to what we're teaching, why we're teaching it, how we're teaching it, so the players are in a situation where they're going to learn best. From a drill component, I think they're really only effective if they're executed properly. And again, that doesn't mean that we're stopping a drill every 5 seconds and trying to correct. Sometimes we need to let players go through 4, 5, or 6 reps in order to see what they're doing. And then maybe it's time to jump in if they see some major errors. But I'm a big believer in kids figuring things out. And we're not spending our whole time as a coach trying to stop them and give them further instruction. In many cases, they're going to learn best just by doing. But having said that, the repetition is key to improvement. From an observation standpoint, John Wooden, famous basketball coach in the US, he looks at his 8 laws of learning. So it's explanation, demonstration, imitation, and then it's repetition, repetition, repetition. And that doesn't mean doing the same drill over and over and over. but it does mean working on a lot of the similar skills, and sometimes they're in a different drill. But the fact of the matter is, we can't expect kids to be, expert puck handlers in one practice, or we can't expect kids to perform certain moves in one practice. It's something that's going to take time, and we have to allow that expectation as a coach, as an instructor, to make sure that we are providing the repetition. Because like I said, we can't expect them to just see something in one practice and all of a sudden master it. It doesn't work that way. So it's repetition over time in order to make sure that they're developing at a pace where they're going to start to see that translate into a game. Sequencing and progressions, we're going to talk a little about progressions and sort of a methodology is into how we teach puck skills. But at the end of the day, you can't play in an orchestra until you learn how to play, your instrument first. Or we don't just throw kids in the swimming pool and have a race the very first day. You have to learn the techniques, and you have to learn some of the concepts, and then ultimately it's going to apply to the team game. And similarly goes with mastering individual skills before we try and master tactics or systems. So we don't get into defense specific teaching right away. We make sure all the players can do all the fundamentals, and then we will progress into teaching forward specific skills or defense specific skills. But at the end of the day, it's that foundation of skating and puck control and whatever the skill may be that's really going to set the stage. So understanding that there's a lot of things to teach, and many times as minor hockey coaches, we feel like we have limited practice time. So that's where it's important to make sure that we are organized. This teaching progression is something that I like to follow, and I think it can help coaches out as far as, it doesn't really matter what the skill is, but if you can provide a bit of a framework for how you want to teach things. So to me, number one is technique. We do have to have technique. I don't typically focus on a lot of biomechanics, especially with the younger players. They need time to figure things out. There is a time when you need to correct technique if something is severely wrong. But at the end of the day, with young players, they're going to kind of figure out how they move, how they perform certain skills, and how they can execute them. Typically, once players sort of reach the puberty standpoint, when they understand sort of what their body is gonna be like when they're really starting to grow, how they're able to move, that's when we can spend more time on technique. Similar to what we talked about last week on the skating side, is we can spend lots of time on the technique of skating, but all of a sudden a player grows 6 inches over the summer and they come back in the fall, everything they just learned is out the window. So we need to make sure that we're providing technique, but it doesn't need to be the most important thing. Then number two is the practice or the repetition side of things, making sure that they have ample time to practice and repeat the techniques so they can get better at it. And the third one, which I've mentioned a couple times, I think is really important, is FIO. So that means figure it out. We need to give players the chance to try things and experiment and figure things out and see what works for them, because everybody moves different, everybody learns different. And sometimes some kids figure things out early, and sometimes other ones figure things out, it takes them a longer period of time, but it doesn't mean they're not all going to get to the same place at some point. So we really do have to understand the differences in players. Then we want to get to a point where we can practice with purpose and speed. So we're applying things in practices that we want to start to do them with a higher pace, with a higher level of intensity, and we want to get speed to it so that we're practicing like we play. And then lastly is game application. And I think this is really important to make sure that we're doing things in practice, or we're working on things that have an application to a game. As I mentioned, sometimes we'll do things in practice that maybe aren't totally game applicable, but at the same time, the majority of the things that we do are all based on gameplay application, and it's just going to be where it happens on the ice. So I think the game application, especially in today's age, with how it's so important to apply things to the game, are really important. We see at a national level a lot of kids who come into our programs, boys and girls, who are great at stick handling around pylons, who are great at stick handling around lots of obstacles, but you get them into a game situation and they don't seem to be able to beat somebody in a one-on-one situation. So the game application of what skill to use, when to use it, how to use it, and why to use it are also very important as a coach to make sure that we're applying those principles when we're teaching the individual skills. So from a technique standpoint, we want to make sure that we're not only teaching for technique, but also for results. So if we take a toe drag, for example, kids love when they first learn how to do that move to do it over and over and over. But there's obviously certain points in the game or certain places on the rink where you don't want to do it. And so that's part of the art of coaching from a coaching standpoint, that we want to make sure that they can do the skill, but then the art of it is to teach them the when and the why and the how, so that they're doing it in a situation where they're going to get results. The repetition makes them help to become consistent performers. And then results happen when repetition leads to mastery, so that the technique can be incorporated in drills and ultimately into games. And that's a key component in the progression side of things, is that we make sure we're doing A before B, before C, before D. If we skip steps A and B and we try to go straight to C, that's where we're going to have problems. And then we feel like we have to go back and try and, teach or relearn certain things. And a lot of times in coaching clinics, when we ask coaches, how many of you have, after your first 3 or 4 practices of the year, have said to yourself, I can't believe what these kids don't know, or I can't believe what these kids can't do. And I think that's a common question or a common phrase that we hear a lot of coaches say. And it really comes down to making sure that, especially at the younger levels, we're really focusing on that foundation and making sure that we have A before B before C. So as they grow through the system, for you coaches that are coaching the older players, it becomes much easier to teach the tactic side, and much easier to teach the team play side, when the players can perform the skill without really having to think about it. From the practice or the repetition side, I think it's important that we make sure that the players can learn at a speed where they can do things well. Sometimes we want them going full speed and we just want to see what they can do, but other times we have to slow things down so they can do it correctly. And I find with a lot of young players, they just want to go, but they end up worrying about the speed more so than the technique for doing it correctly. And yes, there's going to be situations when, we want them to go fast. There's also going to be situations where we need them to slow down so they can do it properly. The use of progressions is very important, and especially when it comes to puck skills. I find that if they can't do it standing still, it's going to be really hard to do it moving, and it's going to be even harder to do it in order to beat an opponent. And that's ultimately where we want to get to with when we're looking at skills within the game, is doing a certain move or a skill at a time so you can beat an opponent, which is going to give you opportunity to extend your possession or create a scoring chance or whatever it's going to be. So, again, I mentioned earlier, it's important to work on same skills, so repetition wise, but it also should be in a variety of drills so that you're keeping practice fresh, keeping the patterns fresh, and that kids have that opportunity to continue to learn without having to get to a point where they're bored because they're doing the same things over and over. And then I think we want them to be in a situation where they can practice and they can think and create and not worry about making mistakes. It's okay if you lose the puck. It's okay if you fall down. What we want to see them do is see them push themselves, and to just practice in a safe environment all the time where they're just trying to not make a mistake. I'm not sure we're going to get to the point where they're actually going to reach their potential. Figure it out, to me, is all about creativity and improvisation. And it's really important that we include this in our drills, because that's really what the game is all about. The game is all about read and react. It's doing a certain action at a time when it calls for it in the game. So it's being able to perform on demand. And the better the fundamental skill level of the players are, the more they're able to do that in the game. So they don't have to think about what they're going to do. They can just read and react to the situation and go from there. And again, we don't want them to be attached to the outcome. It's not necessarily worrying about making a mistake. We want them to reach their creative potential. Now, obviously in games, there's certain times when you don't want to do a certain move at your blue line leaving your zone, or create a turnover at the offensive blue line when you're entering the zone. But at the same time, we want to make them comfortable in trying things, and not just the sort of proverbial dump the puck in and go chase it. We want to try and have kids that can make a decision, who can try things and go from there. So a lot of times we just need to set up the drill and then let the players decide the pattern. So we don't have to necessarily tell them to turn left or turn right or stand here or pass there. It's more about creating the drill, and then let them figure out the pattern, let them make decisions along the way, because that's ultimately where the best players are in the world, is that they make a decision based on what they see and they don't really have to think about it. Practice with purpose and speed is obviously, once they have the technique down to a level where they can do it fairly well, then we want to be able to add speed to it and make sure that there's a purpose. And so that's where we start to add the game elements in. is to make sure that they're doing drills, they're doing patterns that would be similar to what they are in a game, so that we can see that translation. And then obviously you want to be able to do it at game speed. When players can skate with purpose and speed, and they can do it without having to thinking, and then you add the puck to it, that's where the deception and creativity can really come into play. So I encourage you to try and do that with all your drills and practices as much as you can. And finally, the game application. We've all seen players who are great in practice. You know, they have all the moves, they can deko, pylons left and right, they can do anything, but for some reason in a game it just doesn't connect. And so part of it as a coach is to try and figure out those things out and try and figure out how does that apply to the game. And so, you know, again, we all know great practice players, but the great ones are the ones who can do the same thing in practice and also do it in the game. And I think it helps to get players to buy in when they know that they're working on something that's going to help them in a game. Then I think they start to make that link, and they start to try and practice with purpose, and then have the confidence to be able to do the same things in a game. I'm just going to play a little video here from the golf world, and really it tries to emphasize, especially with younger players, is keep it simple. It doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to try and make everything all technical and biomechanical. So it's it's a funny clip from the golf world that'll hopefully sort of send this message and have the message hit home about trying to keep it simple.
I've been asked many times, JC, what are your swing thoughts as you're swinging? What are the secrets? What are the secrets of golf that pros know? Well, I heard this one time, and I remembered it, and it's really, if you'd write this down, it really helped. What I try to do, I try to flat load my feet so I can snap load my power package. That way I can amplify both lag and drag pressure through impact fix. As long as my number 2 power accumulator doesn't break down, I can reach maximum centripetal force with minimum pivotal resistance. You see, the pivot is the utilization of multiple centers to produce a circular motion for generating centrifugal force on an adjusted plane, plus the maintenance and balance necessary to promote the 2-line delivery path. See, golf is geometrically oriented linear force. It involves a physical and muscular thrust and the geometry of the circle. You can divide the golf swing into 24 basic components, each having between 12 and 15 variations. Now, when you think of all this and you get it all set, hopefully you'll hit shots like this.
So at the end of the day, I think, you know, again, we want to try and make sure that our instructions are clear, that we're not trying to overcomplicate things so that kids can actually figure out what we're trying to do. And all kids are going to learn at different paces and different ways. Some are very visual. Some need to learn by doing, some need to learn by watching. But at the end of the day, we want to try and keep it simple. And from my experience in the game of hockey, skating and goaltending are probably the 2 areas that can tend to be the most technical. And I think if kids don't understand it and they don't understand how it applies to their body, then we're probably wasting our time. So we want to try and keep it simple and let them sort of, again, figure things out. And once they get a little bit older, as I mentioned earlier, and they reach that puberty stage, then they're going to start to figure out their bodies, how they move, what works for them, what doesn't. Then we can get more into sort of some of the technical things that might be able to help them out. But at a young age, to me, is with skating or puck control, it's all about sort of agility, balance, and coordination, and get them doing things that get them out of their comfort zone a little bit, so that, you know, when it comes time to situations when that happens in a game, they're comfortable with it and they have confidence. So from a practice standpoint or a drill standpoint, just a little chart here to try and give you an idea of what I think success is in the upper right-hand corner. We want to have as many drills as we can where there's high repetition and they simulate a game. That's going to be your ideal scenario as far as seeing translation from practice into a game. In the bottom left corner, we want to try and avoid things that are non-game like simulation and low repetition. And typically in those situations, that means that the kids aren't active, they're standing in line, they're not actually doing. And, you know, of course, there's always going to come across a situation where maybe you're trying to explain a certain concept where, you know, it might be a bit slower pace or you have to spend some time talking to them. But ultimately, you want to try and do things in a situation where it's high rep and game simulation. Sometimes you're going to be doing high repetition for things that aren't game-like, but it's because we're really trying to get high repetition of a certain skill, and that's going to be okay from time to time. Or conversely, you're going to do something that is very much a game simulation, and there's going to be low reps. And those situations are going to happen from time to time. But if you can try and plan your drills and your practices so there's a high level of repetition and it simulates a game, I think you're going to be in the best situation to see how things can translate into what they're trying to do in a game.